A forbidden archive holds a secret that could rewrite history. Elara is a young archivist with a rare gift, an innate sensitivity to the echoes of ancient magic. She serves the Silent Order, guardians of knowledge who demand absolute obedience. Yet tonight, she deliberately breaks their most sacred rule. She slips into the Grand Repository's forbidden wing, a place no junior archivist is permitted to enter. She is driven by a recurring dream, a vivid vision of a living library hidden deep within the Whispering Woods. Her goal is to find proof of the Sentient Forest Library, a place her order claims is mere myth. She is risking her position, her safety, and perhaps her very sanity to uncover a truth the Order has deliberately buried for centuries. By the end of this tale, you will uncover the hidden cost of preserving knowledge and what it truly means to be its guardian. What happens when an institution tasked with protecting truth becomes the very thing hiding it? The air in the Forbidden Wing was thick and still, a tomb for secrets. Then she saw it, resting on a pedestal of obsidian, a crystal that pulsed with a soft inner light. It was shaped like a seed, and a low hum vibrated through her very bones. Drawn by a force she could not name, Elara reached out, her fingers brushing its cool, smooth surface. A jolt of energy shot up her arm, and her mind was flooded with a torrent of images. She saw a map of the Whispering Woods, more detailed than any she had ever studied, with a single location blazing like a beacon. The Sentient Forest Library was real. As the vision faded, the crystal's warmth lingered, sinking into her palm and leaving behind a faint, shimmering mark. And then she heard them, the whispers, like rustling leaves at the edge of her thoughts. The heavy tread of boots echoed in the corridor outside. Head Archivist Kalin was making his rounds. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she shoved the crystal into a hidden pocket and pressed herself into the shadows, her face a mask of feigned calm as his lantern light swept past the doorway. He saw nothing, but his presence was a chilling reminder of the law she had broken. In that moment, a choice crystallized within her. To confess would mean the crystal's confiscation and her own expulsion, the truth buried once more. But to stay silent was to trust a phantom whisper over centuries of doctrine. She chose the whisper. She chose the truth. The bond with the crystal was already deepening. Brief, ghostly visions of towering, moss-covered trees would flicker at the corner of her eye. A new, desperate understanding took root. The library was not merely a hidden place. It was a living entity, and it was crying out, its vast knowledge fading like a dying breath. If she did not reach it in time, everything it held would be lost forever. As she gathered a satchel with provisions and a stolen map, the leafy murmurs in her mind grew more insistent, a constant pull toward the dark line of the forest. They were no longer just whispers, but a desperate plea, guiding her toward the edge where the known world ended and untold perils began. The Whispering Woods did not simply begin at the tree line, it swallowed it. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming nightshade, and the familiar sounds of the world faded into an unsettling silence. Elara stepped forward, and the path behind her seemed to dissolve into a wall of thorny undergrowth. She was inside a living labyrinth. The crystal in her pocket pulsed warmly against her thigh, its gentle hum a constant counterpoint to the rustling whispers that now filled her mind. Left, the whispers urged, and she obeyed, ducking beneath a low-hanging branch that moments later sprouted needle-sharp thorns. The forest itself was testing her, trying to steer her wrong, but the crystal's guidance was a steady, internal compass. Illusions bloomed in the mist between the trees. She saw the stern face of head archivist Kalin, his voice echoing her past failures. "You are too impulsive, Elara. You lack discipline." The visions were so vivid, she could almost feel the cold stone of the grand repository floor. But she clutched the crystal, focusing on the warmth that seeped into her palm, and the phantom accusations dissolved like smoke. The true path was not a straight line, but a puzzle written in the landscape. Ahead, a massive, vine-choked ruin blocked her way, its stones crumbling at her touch. She had to climb, her fingers scrabbling for purchase as loose rocks skittered into the abyss below. At the top, a circle of ancient, moss-covered stones awaited her. The wind, which had been still, suddenly picked up, whistling through the carvings with a voice of its own. It spoke a riddle. "I speak all languages, yet have no tongue. I hold all stories, yet am not a book. What am I?" Elara's mind, trained for years in the archives, raced through possibilities. The whispers in her head grew silent, waiting. She thought of the crystal, of the living knowledge it represented, and the answer came to her as a quiet certainty. An echo, she whispered into the wind. The moment the word left her lips, the ground beneath her feet trembled. Two massive forms to her left and right, figures she had mistaken for weathered boulders, began to stir. They were stone golems, ancient guardians, their single eyes glowing with a pale, blue light. A misstep, a wrong answer, and they would have crushed her. Fear froze her in place, a cold dread that whispered she was not worthy of this quest. But then she closed her eyes, recalling the first mantra she had ever learned in the Silent Order. "Knowledge seeks the seeker," she recited under her breath, the old words calming the storm inside her. She chose to trust the crystal's pull over the paralyzing fear. The golems did not advance, but their heads turned, tracking her every move as the forest's magic turned aggressive. Vines lashed out like whips, and the whispers from the library became frantic, pleading. Time is fading. The knowledge dies with us. The stakes were no longer just about uncovering a secret, but about preventing a cataclysm of forgotten history. As the last desperate whisper echoed in her mind, the carved stones in the clearing shifted, grinding against one another to reveal a dark, narrow staircase descending deep into the earth. A cold, ancient breath sighed from the darkness below, beckoning her into the final unknown. The descent was a plunge into a world of stone and silence. The air grew cold and heavy, smelling of wet rock and something far older, like the scent of a long-sealed tomb. At the bottom of the winding stairs, the cavern opened into a vast chamber, and there it stood. A tree of impossible size, its trunk so wide she could not see around it, its bark resembling wrinkled parchment, etched with faint, glimmering script. Its roots were not mere anchors, but a tangled, living labyrinth that covered the cavern floor, pulsing with a soft, subterranean light. From the walls and ceiling, glowing fungi in hues of blue and green cast an eerie, shifting illumination. And then the ceiling above groaned, a deep, grating sound of shifting rock. A fine dust of stone rained down, and a long crack snaked across the domed roof. She did not have much time. The whispers in her mind confirmed it, their voices frayed with panic. The Guardian will test you. The pattern of the sky must be remade on the earth. Elara looked up at the fungi, then back at the roots. She understood. The vision from the crystal, the map of constellations blazing in her mind, was the key. She had to arrange the glowing growths to mirror the celestial patterns. Her years in the archives, studying forgotten star lore and celestial charts, suddenly felt less like academic obsession and more like divine preparation. She moved quickly, her fingers carefully transferring the cool, jelly-like fungi, placing them in the specific configurations of the serpent and the chalice. But the pressure mounted with every groan from the ceiling. A piece of rock, the size of her fist, shattered near her feet. In her haste, she misaligned a single, crucial fungus, placing a star of the chalice a hand's breadth from its true position. The moment she stepped back, the roots surged to life. They whipped around her ankles, coiling up her legs like serpents, and a cold, draining sensation seeped into her bones. It was not just physical energy it took, but her memories. The face of her first teacher began to blur. The title of her favorite childhood book slipped from her mind. Panic seized her. She could not lose herself. Thinking fast, she recalled an obscure text on sympathetic magic, the concept that a part could represent the whole. With a desperate prayer, she drew a small knife and sliced off a lock of her dark hair. She threw it onto the root that held her tight. "My life, for the knowledge," she whispered. The root stilled, the draining stopped, and the lock of hair seemed to dissolve into motes of light that were absorbed by the bark. It was an acceptable offering. The roots retreated, slithering back into their labyrinth, and with a sound like 1,000 pages turning, the massive tree began to unfurl. A seam opened in its center, revealing a dark passage leading deeper. But the cost was real. A wave of profound weariness washed over her, and a new, chilling sensation prickled at the back of her neck. Something else was in the caverns now, something that had tasted the essence she had sacrificed and found it desirable. The library's whispers returned, more frightened than before. "It hunts you." The silence comes. Stumbling through the newly opened passage, Elara emerged into a breathtaking sight. A chamber so vast its ceiling was lost in a soft, blue glow, filled with gently floating leaves that shimmered with their own inner light. Each leaf was a page, each page a story, drifting in the calm air of this subterranean sanctuary. And from the shadows between the floating tales, a figure emerged to greet her. The figure standing before her was not entirely a man, but a being woven from the very essence of the library itself. Vines and moss formed his cloak, and his eyes held the soft, shifting light of the floating pages. "I am Finian," he said, his voice a rustle of leaves and old parchment. "The last lore keeper. For centuries, I have waited for one who listens to the whispers, not just with their ears, but with their soul. But intention is everything here. Your heart must be an open book before the library will trust you." He gestured, and one of the shimmering leaves drifted down, settling into his palm and transforming into a small, leather-bound volume that pulsed with a warm, golden light. He offered it to her. "Read this. Tell me what you see." Elara took the book, and the moment her fingers touched the cover, her mind was swept away. She was not reading words on a page, but reliving a memory. She saw herself as a young girl, hiding in a forgotten corner of the grand repository, not to steal, but simply to trace the faded illustrations in a crumbling bestiary, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love for the fragile stories within. The living book showed her another moment, the night she first heard the forest's whisper, a feeling not of ambition, but of a profound, aching responsibility. It laid her soul bare, revealing a motive untainted by greed or a thirst for power. She desired only to preserve, to protect, to remember. The vision faded, and she looked up at Finian, her eyes clear. He gave a slow, solemn nod. The library sees your truth. You are the first true seeker in an age. He then led her to the center of the vast chamber, where the great tree's roots converged upon a massive, central crystal, similar to the one she carried but far larger. This is the heart of all we are, Finian explained, his voice heavy with sorrow, but see how its light flickers. A blight of absolute nothingness, a void we call the silence, has taken root within it. This entity does not destroy knowledge, it consumes it, leaving not even an echo that something was ever lost. He placed a hand on the crystal, and a wave of cold despair washed over Elara. The silence grows fat on forgotten tales, and as our stories fade, so does our strength. The library dies, and with it, every memory it holds. Elara did not hesitate. I will help you heal it, whatever it takes. Finian's luminous eyes grew dark. The price is steep. To strengthen the heart, to push back the void, requires a sacrifice of essence. You must willingly give it a part of yourself, a memory, not just any memory, but one woven deep into your identity. The library will take it, and you will never get it back. As he spoke, the library itself showed her the stakes. Visions flashed around her. She saw a patch of the whispering woods where the colors bled away into gray, the trees themselves dissolving into silent, formless mist. A strange six-legged creature she had read about in bestiaries simply winked out of existence, its story and its physical form erased forever. If the silence consumes the archives, it will not stop here, Finian whispered. It will spill into your world, and history itself will begin to unravel. Elara steeled herself. Show me what to do. Finian guided her hands to the central crystal. Do not command it. Listen, feel, communicate not with words, but with empathy. Let your gratitude for knowledge, your sorrow for what is lost, flow into it. As she focused, channeling her love for every story she had ever saved, and her grief for every one already forgotten, a faint, warm light began to pulse from her palms into the crystal. For a single, hopeful moment, the dark blight within it seemed to recede. Then a violent tremor shook the entire chamber. The floating pages swirled in a frantic storm, and from the tunnels beyond, the library's whispers became unified, terrified screams. The silence is here. A tide of absolute nothingness poured into the sanctuary. The black mist was not smoke, but a living void that drank the light from the air and the stories from the pages. Floating leaves withered and turned to gray dust as the tendrils slithered across them, erasing tales of heroism and love in an instant. Elara and Finian ran for the library's heart, the great tree at the chamber's center, but they were too late to stop the advance. Cracks had already appeared in the crystal, and the corrosive mist was seeping inside. Without thinking, Elara thrust her own bonded crystal forward, a pulse of warm light erupting from it. The mist recoiled, but only for a moment. Then it lashed out, not at her, but at a nearby cluster of archives. The stories stored there vanished, not with a bang, but with a sigh of forgotten words, their light extinguished forever. The choice was immediate and terrible. Finian cried out as a wisp of the mist touched his arm, the vines of his form withering and turning brittle. She could try to attack the source of the corruption directly, a reckless act that might shatter her own mind against the void, or she could protect the last lore keeper. She chose to protect. Planting herself between Finian and the onslaught, she poured her will into her crystal, weaving a shimmering barrier of light. As she did, she recited the words of an ancient preservation spell, one she had found in a forbidden text deep in the grand repository. The words were a lifeline, a thread of order against the chaos, and the corruption spread slowed to a crawl. The silence did not appreciate being denied. In retaliation, the mist coalesced, drawing on the stolen knowledge of her own life. From the swirling darkness, a shadowy figure stepped forward. It wore her face, it used her voice. Let go, it whispered, its tone a perfect mimic of her own weary thoughts. This fight is not yours. The order was right. Some knowledge is meant to be lost. The deception was a cold knife in her heart. For a terrifying second, the barrier of light wavered. Behind her, the library's heart gave a sickly, faltering pulse, its light growing dim. It was dying. Finian, his voice strained, gripped her shoulder. His touch was a grounding reality against the lies. The heart is too weak, he said, his words urgent. You cannot fight the void with strength alone. You must fill it. You must find the echoes of the ancients, the first memories stored in the oldest trees of this forest. Their raw power is the only thing that can reignite the heart and purge this corruption. The grove of petrified trees stood silent and still, their branches like frozen lightning against the cavern's eerie glow. Finian's words echoed in her mind. These were the oldest trees, the first librarians, and within their stone hearts slept the echoes of the ancients. To wake them required not force, but a key of sound. Elara closed her eyes, pushing back her fear, and began to hum a low, resonant note her archival studies had taught her was the frequency of remembrance. The air around the nearest tree shimmered. A ghostly image of a long-vanished civilization flickered to life around her, a city of crystal spires under a green sun. This was the echo, a raw, living memory, but as she harmonized with the tree's latent magic, the present world vanished. She was plunged completely into the past. She stood as a silent witness to the library's birth, seeing the great tree planted as a seed of pure knowledge by beings of light. And she saw the first, subtle incursion of the silence, a mere shadow that slipped in unnoticed during a moment of doubt among the first lore keepers. The vision was overwhelming, and when she finally pulled the echo free, a silvery wisp of light that flowed into her crystal, she returned to the grove, momentarily blind and disoriented. The silence immediately preyed on this vulnerability. As she approached the second tree, the plaintive cry of her childhood mentor rang out. "Elara, help me, I am trapped." The illusion was perfect, a heart-wrenching sound designed to break her concentration. Her instincts screamed to run to the voice, but her archival training kicked in. A real memory has a texture, a resonance. This was a hollow copy, a phantom. She turned her back on the desperate pleas and focused on her song, her voice steady even as tears streaked her face. With each echo she collected, her crystal grew warmer and heavier, a comforting weight against the growing dread. The second memory showed a council of the first keepers debating how to contain the silence, their fear a palpable force. The third echo, from the smallest tree, held the memory of a single, selfless sacrifice, a keeper who gave her entire essence to reinforce the heart crystal for 1,000 years. But the more power she gathered, the more the silence focused its wrath upon her. The very ground of the grove fractured, and from the cracks, spectral hands of nothingness clawed at her ankles, their touch bleaching the warmth from her skin and threatening to pull her into the void. Their desperate aggression revealed a profound truth. The silence did not just consume knowledge, it feared it. These primal memories held the story of its origin, the very truth that could unravel its existence. Clutching the 3 pulsing echoes within her crystal, Elara turned to run back to Finian, but the grove was no longer where she had left it. The petrified trees had shifted, their trunks now forming the walls of a narrow, dark corridor that ended in a single arched doorway. She rushed through it, expecting the vast heart chamber, and instead found herself trapped in a hall of mirrors. But these mirrors did not show her reflection. They showed her deepest fears. One mirror showed her as an old woman, alone in the grand repository, having forgotten her own name and the great library she once saved. Another showed the whispering woods turned to silent, gray dust, the blight spreading unchecked into the world. The final mirror showed head Archivist Kalin, his eyes filled with a cold triumph, holding her now dark crystal, the last echoes extinguished forever. The path was gone, and the only way forward was through the terrifying gallery of her own failures. The mirrors did not show her reflection. They showed her soul stripped bare. The first mirror shimmered, and she saw herself standing before the High Council of the Silent Order. Her head bowed as head Archivist Kalin formally expelled her, his voice dripping with cold disappointment. "You have brought shame upon our sacred trust." The image was so vivid, she could feel the hot sting of tears. To break it, she had to speak a truth against the lie. "My curiosity is not a flaw," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It is my compass." She slammed her palm against the glass, and it exploded into 1,000 shards of light. The effort left her breathless, a deep emotional fatigue settling in her bones. The whispers of the silence slithered into that new emptiness. "You see," it hissed. "You are not enough." The second mirror showed her family, their faces etched with pity and confusion, turning away from her as she tried to explain her quest. She shattered it by declaring, "My purpose is greater than their understanding." But with each affirmation, the drain grew worse. She felt hollowed out, her confidence fraying at the edges. The final mirror awaited her, larger and darker than the rest. It did not show a past failure, but a future one. She saw herself kneeling in the heart chamber, the great tree of the library turning to gray dust around her, the last light in the central crystal flickering out. The shadowy figure of the silence stood over her, whispering its most potent lie. "Your struggle is meaningless. All stories end. Just accept it, and the pain will stop." For a horrifying moment, the temptation to surrender was a physical ache. It would be so easy to let go, but then she thought of the lost city under the green sun, the selfless sacrifice of the ancient keeper, the six-legged creature erased from existence. She clutched the crystal containing the echoes, and her voice, though raw with exhaustion, rang with absolute certainty. Every story, she declared, every single one, deserves to be remembered. A brilliant, defiant light erupted from her crystal, not as an attack, but as a proclamation. The final mirror shattered, and the entire illusory hall collapsed inward with a sound like breaking ice. She was back on the stone path, gasping for air, but her victory had come at a cost. A jagged crack now ran across the face of her crystal, and the powerful echoes trapped inside were leaking out in faint, silvery wisps. The warmth it had always provided was fading, replaced by a creeping chill. The silence was no longer a distant threat. She could feel its cold breath on the back of her neck, a void of absolute attention, focused solely on her. Stumbling forward, she burst into the vast heart chamber. The scene was one of desperate struggle. Finian was locked in a frantic battle with the shadowy figure that wore her face, his vine-like limbs straining to hold back the corrosive mist. And at the chamber's center, the library's great heart pulsed with a sickly, faltering rhythm. Its light so dim, the encroaching darkness seemed to swallow the very air. Elara did not hesitate. She sprinted to the great tree's base, the three silvery echoes swirling within her cracked crystal. With a final, desperate prayer, she pressed the crystal against the heart of the library and into a fissure that seemed to open just for her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, light erupted. A pure, white radiance flooded the chamber, so brilliant it forced the creeping tendrils of the silence to recoil with a silent, furious shriek. The heart pulsed, and a torrent of forgotten memories washed over her. She saw the truth. The silence was not a natural force. It was a wound, a cancerous void born from a single, unforgivable act. Centuries ago, the founders of her own silent order, fearing a prophecy they could not control, had deliberately erased a foundational story from the library's core. They had murdered a piece of history itself, and that act of supreme arrogance had given birth to the very entity that now sought to consume all knowledge. The heart showed her more. It showed her head Archivist Kalin, not as a villain, but as a terrified man. He knew the Order's secret shame, and in his fear of the power they had unleashed, he continued their work, deliberately suppressing dangerous truths. Feeding the silence with every story he locked away in the forbidden archives. The library's revival was only a temporary victory. The light pushed the void back, but it would not destroy it. The corruption would always return as long as its source, the fear and control practiced by the Silent Order, remained unchecked. Elara faced a terrible crossroads. She could flee back to her world and confront Kalin, exposing the Order's lie and risking her life, or she could stay and tend the library, knowing the fight would never truly be over. She made her choice. She would not just be a visitor or a temporary savior. She would become a part of this living memory. Placing both hands on the warm, pulsing crystal, she offered it a final gift. She gave it the memory of her mother, singing her to sleep, a story of safety and love she had carried her entire life, the one treasure she had always protected from the world's harshness. She felt the memory leave her, a tangible thing, slipping from her mind like a page torn from a book and cast into a fire. There was no pain, only a profound, hollow emptiness where a cherished part of her soul had once lived. The heart of the library blazed with a new, stable, golden light, drinking in her sacrifice and growing stronger. But the silence, denied its final victory, did not retreat. It coalesced all its stolen power, all its rage, into a single, horrifying form. A shifting, faceless giant of absolute nothingness that lunged across the chamber. As the heart's energy solidified into a protective shield around the great tree, Finnion's voice cut through the roaring silence. He shouted a warning, his arm outstretched, pointing not at Elara, but at the cracked crystal, still glowing in the heart's core. The silence was not aiming for her. It was aiming for the key to its own defeat. The final lunge of the silence was a wave of pure oblivion, a darkness that swallowed sound and light as it surged toward the library's heart. Elara saw its true target, the cracked crystal pulsing with the echoes of the ancients. In that splinter of a second, she understood the final, terrible price. The crystal was not just a key, it was a vessel, and to save the library, the vessel itself had to break. She tore it from the heart, and with all her strength, slammed it against the ancient tree's roots. The shattering sound was not of glass, but of a universe being born. A wave of pure, archival energy erupted outwards, a silent, blinding nova of every story ever told. The light did not push back the darkness, it unmade it. The monstrous form of the silence dissolved into a trillion forgotten motes, its corrosive presence scoured from the air. The great tree flared with vibrant, healthy light, its bark smoothing as the fissures sealed. The floating pages glowed with renewed brilliance, their whispers now a contented, unified hum. And then, for Elara, there was only silence, a profound, internal quiet. The constant, comforting murmur of the library, the guiding whispers that had been her companions since she first touched the crystal, were gone. The warmth in her palm was gone. She was just Elara again, an archivist with a satchel and a stolen map, standing in a miracle she could no longer hear. A hollow emptiness yawned inside her, a grief for the lost connection that had defined her. She looked at her empty hands, and the fear was a cold stone in her stomach. Had she lost her purpose along with her gift? But then she looked at Finian, at the living light now steady in the great tree, and she understood. True preservation is not about holding on. It is about knowing when to let go. She accepted the loss, and with a quiet nod to the last lore keeper, she began helping him clear the last, fading tendrils of the void, her work now grounded in simple, physical action. The victory, however, had been too bright, too powerful to conceal. Far above, in the world of men, the magical surge had rippled outwards like a shockwave. It resonated through the obsidian pillars of the grand repository, shaking scrolls from their cases and setting alarm crystals humming. Head Archivist Kalin felt it in his bones, a terrifying, familiar power he had dedicated his life to suppressing. He knew exactly what it meant and where it had originated. He immediately assembled a contingent of his most loyal guardians. Their mission was not one of curiosity, but of control. They were going to the Whispering Woods to seal the breach, to bury the truth once and for all. As the last wisp of corruption faded from the heart chamber, Finian turned to Elara, his luminous eyes filled with a new, profound respect. Your connection to the whispers may be severed, but your bond to the story is eternal. The library does not need you to hear it. It needs you to speak for it. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I name you our first external ambassador. Your new purpose is to bridge our world and yours, to ensure knowledge is shared, not hoarded in fear. But before Elara could respond, a new, all too familiar voice, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, echoed from the cavern entrance they had first used. It is too late for new purposes. The voice of head archivist Kalin cut through the chamber's peace. The time for sealing this place away has come. Kalin stood at the cavern entrance, his face a rigid mask of authority, but his eyes betrayed a deep, unsettling shock. He was not seeing a myth, but a living, breathing truth he had been taught to fear. Elara stepped forward, placing herself between him and the library's glowing heart. The Order did not protect knowledge, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You tried to control it, and in your fear, you created the very monster you sought to bury. Your act of erasing that first story was the wound that festered into the silence. His guards shifted uneasily as her words hung in the air, a direct challenge to centuries of doctrine. Kalin's gaze swept over the revitalized library, the floating pages humming with life, the great tree radiating a health that defied his deepest convictions. The evidence was undeniable. His shoulders slumped, the rigid posture of the head archivist crumbling into the weary stance of a fallible man. You speak the truth, he admitted, the words seeming to cost him a great effort. We sought to prevent chaos, and instead, we cultivated a far greater ruin. He called off the ceiling, lowering his hand to halt his guardians. But this place must remain hidden, Elara. The world is not ready for such power. It must be protected. This was the old fear speaking, the instinct to retreat and control. Elara shook her head, her gesture taking in the vast, living archive around them. Protection does not mean isolation. A story untold is a story that dies. Knowledge hoarded in the dark becomes a poison, just as it did for the Order. It must be shared, carefully and wisely, or the cycle will only repeat. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the lifetime of training warring with the undeniable proof before him. She proposed a bridge, not a wall. Let me act as the liaison. I will vet those who seek the library's wisdom, ensuring only those with pure intent, true seekers, may enter. In return, the Silent Order will use its resources to preserve the Whispering Woods, to guard its borders not as a prison, but as a sanctuary. Kalin was silent for a long moment, weighing the immense risk against the catastrophic cost of doing nothing. He finally gave a slow, solemn nod. I will endorse this compromise. But know this, he warned, his voice low and grave. I am not the entire Order. There are others, more rigid than I, who will see this not as wisdom, but as heresy. This peace is fragile, as if in response to their accord, a gentle warmth spread through the chamber. The frantic, desperate whispers of the library softened into a contented, gentle hum, and tiny, new shoots of light began to sprout from the great tree's roots, the library itself beginning to regrow and heal. With attention broken, Kalin and his guardians began their retreat, their lanterns casting long, uncertain shadows back the way they had come. From the heart of the great tree, Finian emerged, his form now more vibrant, the moss of his cloak a deeper green. In his palm, he held a single, perfect seed that glowed with a soft, familiar light. It is not a replacement for what you lost, he said to Elara, his voice a gentle rustle. That sacrifice is part of the library now, a story of its own. This is something new, a seed from the heart, bonded to your spirit. It will not whisper to you of paths or dangers. It will grow with you, a quiet companion on your new path, a symbol of the living bond you have forged. It is a connection not of magic, but of purpose. Elara planted the glowing seed in a sheltered grove where the library's roots met the sun. The moment it touched the soil, it sprouted into a slender, silver-barked sapling that pulsed with a soft, warm light, its gentle rhythm a perfect echo of her own heartbeat. This was no mere plant. It was a new anchor, a living bridge. Her first task was to teach the stunned archivists from the silent order how to listen. She showed them that a request for knowledge was not a command, but a conversation. They learned to approach the floating pages with reverence, to offer a memory of their own in exchange for a story, a practice that enriched both the seeker and the library itself. As this new symbiosis took root, the forest itself began to change. Stories did not just stay on the pages. They wove themselves into the bioluminescent fungi, which now pulsed in narrative patterns. They were carried on the wind, causing flowers to bloom in the shapes of ancient runes. The knowledge was no longer locked away. It was alive, breathing, and growing. To manage this delicate new flow, Elara founded a new branch of the order, the Curators of the Living Word, but progress was met with resistance. Traditionalists, led by a stern senior archivist named Valerius, saw this as a dangerous dilution of their purpose. They argued that knowledge was a treasure to be guarded, not a seed to be scattered. When a rare botanical text, requested by a healer, caused a grove of medicinal plants to sprout near the grand repository, Valerius called it a contamination. Elara did not confront him with anger. Instead, she diplomatically guided him to the new grove, where he witnessed the healer successfully saving a wounded forest creature using the very knowledge that had bloomed. The proof was in the vibrant, thriving life before him. To truly unite the old and the new, Elara made a pivotal decision. She would divide her time, serving as a liaison between the stone halls of the grand repository and the living heart of the Sentient Library. She brought the Order's meticulous cataloging methods to the forest, helping Finian organize the drifting stories, and in return, she introduced the archivists to the intuitive, empathetic way of seeking that the library required. As the library's influence expanded, its call was heard. Genuine seekers, scholars of natural magic, and even reclusive magical beings began to arrive, drawn by the promise of a dialogue with history itself. Yet this very success raised the stakes. Such a powerful concentration of living knowledge could not remain hidden forever from those who would see it not as a partner, but as a prize to be captured and controlled. Whispers from the forest edges spoke of shadowy figures watching, of a cabal that collected magic not to preserve it, but to consume it. One evening, as Elara rested her hand against her silver tree, a profound sense of peace washed over her. A single, clear thought, not a whisper, but a feeling of deep gratitude, flowed from the great library directly into her heart. Thank you. As the feeling faded, she looked down and saw that her tree had borne its first leaf. It was not green, but crystalline, and etched upon its shimmering surface was the story of a young archivist who dared to listen to a whisper. The reformed silence was a storm of pure negation, its tendrils of void lashing at the library's newly healed heart. Each strike dimmed the great tree's light, and the floating pages began to wilt at their edges, their stories fading back into gray. Elara watched the frantic efforts of Finian and the Archivists, their individual spells of protection, flickering and failing against the overwhelming tide. A terrifying clarity struck her. They were fighting a unified force of emptiness with scattered, solitary acts of defiance. This enemy could not be defeated by one story, one memory, or one person. It had to be met with the entire weight of everything they had ever saved. She turned, her voice cutting through the chaos. It feeds on our separation. We must unite every story we hold. Finian understood instantly, his luminous eyes meeting hers with a solemn nod. He pressed his hands to the heart tree, and his form began to glow, not with his own light, but with the countless tales he had safeguarded for centuries. Head Archivist Kalin, his face pale with fear and awe, hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. He placed a trembling hand on the tree, and for the first time, he did not offer a spell of control, but a memory. It was the story of his first day as an archivist, the overwhelming feeling of reverence he had felt for the fragile scrolls, a feeling he had long buried under dogma. As his memory flowed into the tree, a brilliant thread of golden light wove itself into the defensive barrier. One by one, the other archivists, even the reluctant Valerius, saw the truth. They joined the circle, each one offering a cherished memory, a favorite tale, a moment of personal discovery. A scholar offered the memory of deciphering his first ancient text. A healer offered the story of a life saved with forgotten lore. Elara closed her eyes and gave everything she had left. She offered the memory of the crystal's first warmth in her hand, the terror and wonder of the stone golems, the hollow ache of her sacrifice, and the profound peace of watching her silver tree sprout its first leaf. The cascade of narrative energy was not an explosion, but an unfolding. It was a tapestry woven from every joy, every sorrow, every triumph, and every failure held within the chamber. The void of the silence recoiled, not from light, but from meaning. It had no defense against the shared story of a young girl's love for a book, or an old man's rediscovered faith. The corrosive mist began to change, its absolute blackness softening, gaining texture. It absorbed a tale of resilience and became a shimmer of stubborn hope. It consumed a story of forgiveness and became a gentle sigh of release. The silence was not destroyed. It was overwritten, transformed by the very thing it sought to consume. It dissolved into a chorus of harmless, beautiful echoes that drifted among the library's branches like ethereal music, a permanent reminder of the victory won through unity. In the profound quiet that followed, the library's heart did not just glow. It sang, a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the stone and into the souls of everyone present. The great tree stood taller, its bark now intricately carved with the faces and forms of all who had joined the circle. The Sentient Forest Library was no longer just a guardian of history. It had become a living monument to shared memory, its place in the world forever solidified not by walls, but by the unbreakable bonds of countless intertwined stories. Elara's silver tree now stood strong, its crystalline leaves catching the light of the library's pulsing heart. She watched from a quiet overlook as archivists in traditional gray robes worked beside sprites made of woven light, together cataloging a new bloom of glowing fungi that held the history of an ancient river. This was no longer the hidden refuge she had first discovered, nor was it the fortress the old order had tried to build. It was a living bridge, Her own journey had mirrored this transformation, from a junior archivist who broke the rules into a keeper of something far more fragile than any single secret, the balance between guarding knowledge and letting it breathe. Her greatest personal sacrifices, the lost whisper in her mind and the cherished memory of her mother's lullaby, were not wounds anymore. They were the foundations of a new legacy, one written not on locked-away scrolls, but in the thriving, interconnected life of the forest itself. The world beyond the whispering woods remained a place of intrigue and potential danger. Rumors still drifted in of powerful collectors and fearful factions who saw the library not as a partner, but as a weapon or a prize. Yet the library's influence had grown in ways no single force could easily contain. Its stories were no longer confined to a single cavern. They were carried on the wind, woven into the roots of distant trees, and seated in the dreams of true seekers across the land. The whispers had changed too. They did not speak only of past tales, but of future ones, of histories yet to be uncovered, and truths waiting for a courageous heart to find them. Elara felt the pull of those unwritten adventures, a quiet hum of possibility from the silver tree at her side. The work of preservation is never truly finished. It simply evolves, and the most important story is always the one that has yet to be told.